The flight had just begun boarding when a woman in plain clothes quietly walked down the aisle, clutching her small handbag and looking for her seat. She wasn't dressed in designer labels, nor did she carry the kind of luggage that turned heads in a first-class cabin. To the well-dressed passengers already seated in luxury, she seemed out of place. Some chuckled under their breath, others exchanged smug looks, and a few whispered comments reached her ears. It was clear they thought she didn't belong there, as if the comfort of first class was reserved only for people who looked the part. But the woman didn't respond. She sat down calmly, her gentle smile never fading, even as the laughter and snide remarks continued. To anyone watching, it might have seemed like she didn't notice, but in truth, she noticed everything. The way one passenger pretended to cover a laugh, the way another muttered that people should know their place. Still, she stayed composed, almost as if she knew something the others didn't. As the cabin crew prepared for takeoff, the tension grew sharper. The other passengers assumed they had her figured out, a simple woman who somehow managed to afford a seat she didn't deserve. What they couldn't possibly imagine was that the very airline they were sitting in, the one they believed was a symbol of status and wealth, was tied more closely to her life than they would ever expect. Because the truth was, this woman wasn't just a random passenger. Her quiet strength and unshaken calm came from knowing something that would soon leave the entire cabin stunned. The very people laughing at her were about to discover a secret that would turn their judgment into regret. Her husband was the man who owned the airline itself. The woman adjusted herself in her seat, her eyes calmly observing the people around her. She wasn't bothered by the looks or the whispers, but deep down she couldn't ignore how quick people were to judge. Her clothes were plain, her hair tied back simply, and her voice soft when she asked the flight attendant for a glass of water. To the others, that was enough to decide she didn't belong. What they didn't know was that she had never cared for expensive jewelry or flashy appearances. She had grown up with little, and even when life changed dramatically after marriage, she chose to stay true to herself. Across the aisle, a man in a sharp suit leaned toward his companion and muttered something about people buying discount upgrades. A woman behind them laughed lightly, covering her mouth as if to hide it. The remarks weren't loud, but they carried enough sting to remind her of moments she had faced all her life. Moments when people assumed her worth based only on what they could see. She remained silent, her calm expression never breaking, but her thoughts drifted back to her husband. He was away on business, as usual, working tirelessly to expand the very airline these passengers were now enjoying. What made her smile faintly was the irony of it all. These people were sitting in comfort, sipping champagne, unaware that the reason they could travel in such style was because of the man she shared her life with. She didn't need to correct them. Not yet. Let them believe what they wanted, she thought. Sometimes silence spoke louder than words. Still, the tension in the air was impossible to ignore. The laughter continued in small bursts, and eyes lingered on her longer than they should. The stage was quietly being set for a moment no one on that flight would forget. As the plane leveled out in the sky, the first-class cabin grew quieter, though the undercurrent of judgment still lingered. Some passengers leaned back into their leather seats, sipping wine and flipping through glossy magazines, but their eyes would occasionally drift toward the woman who didn't fit in. A few even exchanged smirks, as if sharing a private joke. The woman, however, remained composed, her gaze fixed on the small window beside her, watching the clouds drift by. The flight attendants, trained to stay professional, noticed the whispers too. One of them, a young stewardess, offered the woman a kind smile, sensing the tension. But even she wondered who this passenger really was. Why would someone so modest in appearance choose to sit in one of the most expensive seats on the plane? The curiosity in her eyes was clear, and it added to the quiet stir forming among the cabin. Meanwhile, two businessmen seated a few rows ahead began talking louder than necessary. They compared watches, bragged about their latest deals, and casually tossed glances backward toward the simple woman. Their tone wasn't just arrogant. It carried the assumption that wealth and class could be spotted instantly. To them, she was invisible, someone not worth acknowledging beyond a passing laugh. Yet, what none of them knew was that each mocking word and dismissive look only deepened the contrast between what they assumed and the truth that was waiting to surface. The woman's thoughts wandered to her husband's story, how he had started with nothing but determination and built the airline from scratch. She had been beside him through the sleepless nights, the failures, the breakthroughs. This airline wasn't just his success, it was theirs. Still, she sat quietly, letting the tension build, knowing the moment of revelation had not yet come. The flight, for now, carried more than passengers. It carried assumptions about to be shattered. The flight carried on, but the unease in the first-class cabin only grew heavier. The simple woman sat quietly, her presence somehow making the other passengers more restless. Every time she lifted her glass or shifted in her seat, eyes followed her. It was as if the others were waiting for her to make a mistake, something they could use to confirm the story they had already written about her. The smirks, the whispers, the subtle laughter, all of it circled her like a storm she refused to step into. A few rows ahead, the businessmen raised their voices again, discussing how first class should be reserved for people who've earned it. Their words weren't directed at her by name, but everyone knew who they meant. A woman across the aisle adjusted her diamond bracelet and glanced toward her with pity that felt more insulting than kind. The tension was no longer just in hushed whispers. It was out in the open, hanging in the air for everyone to feel. The stewardess returned with refills, her polite smile betraying the fact that she, too, sensed the drama unfolding. She looked at the woman almost apologetically, but the woman only offered a soft "thank you," her calm voice carrying more weight than any defense could have. She wasn't playing their game, and that silence unnerved them more than if she had snapped back. Then came the moment that pulled everyone's attention. As the flight settled midair, the captain's voice echoed through the speakers, but instead of the usual sterile announcement, his tone was warm, personal. He welcomed everyone aboard and spoke with pride about the airline's history and the people behind it. The cabin stirred as passengers realized this wasn't the usual speech. Something in his words hinted at more, something that would soon tie directly to the woman they had mocked, a truth waiting to drop like thunder in the quiet sky. The captain's voice continued over the speakers, steady yet filled with a kind of pride that made the passengers listen more carefully. He spoke of how the airline began with a single plane, built through persistence and sacrifice, and how its success came not just from business strategies, but from the unwavering support of family. His words carried weight, and for the first time during the flight, the mocking whispers fell silent. Passengers leaned in, curious, sensing that this announcement was not routine. The simple woman listened quietly, her hands folded in her lap. She knew the story better than anyone. It was her story too, but she didn't move, didn't smile, didn't show anything that would give her secret away. The others, however, were beginning to piece together fragments, wondering why the captain's speech suddenly sounded so personal. The tension in the cabin sharpened. Then came the twist that deepened the unease. The captain mentioned that a very important guest was traveling in first class that day, someone who had played a vital role in shaping the airline's future. Murmurs rippled through the cabin as passengers turned their heads, scanning the seats. The businessmen exchanged glances, one whispering, "Must be one of the investors." The woman with the diamond bracelet straightened in her chair, almost as if preparing to be acknowledged. Each passenger assumed the honor belonged to someone who looked the part, someone like them. But the captain's words lingered, leaving the mystery unsolved. He didn't reveal a name yet, only hinted that the person was seated among them. The air grew thick with expectation, and suddenly every set of eyes seemed sharper, every assumption more fragile. For the first time, the laughter was gone. Now, all that remained was a question hanging in the cabin. Who exactly was the woman they had dismissed so easily? The captain's voice grew warmer, almost emotional, as he finally revealed the truth. "Today, we are honored to have on board someone very special. She may not be known to the public, but without her, this airline would not exist. She is the heart and strength behind the man who built this company from nothing. Please join me in welcoming my wife, seated here in first class." The cabin froze. Every eye turned toward the simple woman they had laughed at, their faces shifting from smugness to disbelief. The businessmen who had mocked her fell silent, their confidence collapsing into shame. The woman with the diamond bracelet lowered her gaze, unable to meet her eyes. Even the stewardess, who had sensed something unusual, now looked at her with newfound respect. The woman remained calm, just as she had from the beginning. She didn't gloat, didn't seek revenge. She simply offered a gentle nod as the cabin filled with awkward applause, the kind that carried both admiration and regret. In that moment, the judgment and arrogance that had filled the air earlier seemed to vanish, replaced by an undeniable truth. Appearances could be deceiving, and respect should never depend on wealth or style. But just as the passengers thought they understood the full story, the twist came. The captain added, "And to make this journey more meaningful, I'd like to share that my wife isn't just part of the story. She is now stepping into her own role. From next month, she will be taking over as the chairperson of the airline." Gasps rippled through the cabin. The same woman they had dismissed moments ago wasn't only connected to the airline, she was about to lead it. The laughter that once circled her was gone forever, replaced by silence heavy with awe. The cabin remained silent for a moment, the weight of the captain's words hanging in the air. Then, slowly, the applause grew stronger, this time filled with genuine respect rather than awkwardness. Passengers who had once mocked the woman now looked at her differently, realizing how wrong their assumptions had been. The businessmen who had laughed earlier sank back into their seats, their pride bruised, while the woman with the diamond bracelet offered a faint smile, though her eyes revealed embarrassment. The simple woman, however, showed no sign of arrogance. She acknowledged the attention with a calm nod and returned her gaze to the window. She wasn't interested in proving anyone wrong. She had never cared about status or appearance. What mattered most to her was staying true to herself, supporting her husband's dream, and now stepping into her own role with dignity. The journey she had taken, from a life of simplicity to becoming the future leader of the airline, was not about wealth but about values, perseverance, and humility. As the flight continued, the mood in first class shifted completely. The passengers who once judged her began speaking in quieter, more thoughtful tones. Some avoided her gaze out of guilt, while others watched her with admiration, realizing that true strength was not in jewelry, designer clothes, or loud boasts, but in character. Even the stewardess, who had sensed the tension earlier, now looked at her with pride, inspired by the quiet lesson unfolding before everyone's eyes. By the time the plane began its descent, the story of that flight had already left its mark. The passengers learned that respect should never depend on appearance. The simple woman who once faced laughter walked away as the symbol of grace and quiet power, reminding everyone that real worth always speaks louder than judgment.